First, you have some time to look at questions 1 to 6.
Good morning, Towers Car Insurance. How can I help you?
Hello, I was wondering if you could give me a quote for my car, please. I'd like to insure it for a period of 12 months.
Certainly. I need to take down a few details first of all. Can I have your name, please?
Certainly, it's James Bartolo.
Sorry, can you say that again, please?
Sure, James Bartolo. That's Bartolo.
OK, thanks. And your date of birth?
It's the 1st of the 8th, 1973.
Great. And can you give me your address, please?
Sure, it's 146 Eastern Road, Chester.
Fabulous. Now, is the insurance for just yourself?
No, actually my wife drives the car too. Her name is Alice Jackson and her date of birth is the 23rd of the 4th, 1968.
That's OK. I just need to write yes or no and the make and model of the car you wish to insure.
It's a 1998 Ford Laser.
OK. And do you have any idea of the value of the car?
Yes, it's around £4,000. I only bought it about a week ago.
Before you hear the rest of the conversation, you have some time to look at questions 7 to 10. Now listen and answer questions 7 to 10.
OK. And do either you or your wife have any previous convictions or disqualifications? I'm sorry we have to ask this question, but of course it affects the price of the insurance cover.
Not a problem. No, actually we both have clean driving licenses. Nothing so far, touch wood.
Good. So I can write none for that question. Now, who were you previously insured with?
With Aitken Insurance.
I'm sorry, could you spell that?
Yes, it's Aitken. I actually have a 3 years no claims bonus too.
Great. That will bring the price down a little for you too. OK, if you just give me a few minutes, I'll work out a price for you now. That looks like it will be £275 per year.
That sounds good to me. Can I pay for that now over the telephone?
That is the end of part 1.
You now have half a minute to check your answers.
Now turns to part 2.
Part 2. You will hear part of a lecture on art and culture in the Indonesian island of Bali.
First, you have some time to look at questions 11 to 15. Now, listen carefully and answer questions 11 to 15.
Last week, we looked at the traditional art of Japan. In this week's lecture, we're going to move south and look at the very special way in which art has developed in the beautiful island of Bali, which is now part of Indonesia. I'll begin by giving you a brief historical overview. It's thought that the first inhabitants of Bali were farmers who arrived around 3000 BC, at the beginning of the Iron Age. They probably originally came from China, and in Bali they cultivated rice and built temples ornamented with wood and stone carvings and statues. The Hindu religion was introduced in the 14th century AD, and this has remained the main religion on the island. This was an important period in the artistic development of the island, when sculptors, poets, priests and painters worked together in the service of the ruling families. Rather than painting everyday scenes, artists concentrated on narrative paintings illustrating the epic stories of Hinduism. Bali's rich natural resources have always made it an alluring goal for merchants, and from the 17th century onwards, Dutch ships visited the island to trade in spices and luxury goods. Gradually, the old royal families lost their power, and eventually, in 1906, the Dutch East Indies Company was founded, and the island became a colony. In the 20th century, art then took on a very different role, as a tool accessible to everyone in the fight of the Balinese people against colonization, rather than as the property of a minority. Shortly after this, in the 1920s, stories of the beauty of the island of Bali began to spread around the world, and Balinese art underwent another vast transformation with the advent of tourism to the island. At first, this was only on a small scale, but it had important effects. Expatriate artists from Holland and Germany settled on the island, bringing paper, Chinese ink and other new materials with them. They worked with local artists, encouraging them to experiment with concepts like naturalism, expressionism, light and perspective, as well as to move away from the traditional focus on narrative painting towards something closer to their own experience. When independence came in 1945, this desire for an art to match a new national identity became stronger, and the traditional narrative paintings started to give way to scenes showing the everyday life of the Balinese people, harvests, market scenes and daily tasks, as well as the myths and legends of their history.
Before you hear the rest of the talk, you have some time to look at questions 16 to 20. Now listen and answer questions 16 to 20.
Many of the features that give this art its special place in the world today can be traced back to these historical roots. One feature that is rooted in the events of the last century is that today in Bali, the production and the appreciation of art is not restricted to a minority. In fact, there is a famous saying that in Bali, everyone is an artist. And it's not considered that to make art or talk about art, any formal training is needed. Art is just produced as part of Balinese life. Even fruit salad is served with flowers strewn on top. One factor which has contributed to this productivity is Bali's fertility. Over the centuries, the rich soil and the fact that food and shelter are readily available has given the islanders the leisure to develop their arts. While painting, sculpture, carving and music have traditionally been the province of men, women have channeled their creative energy into making lavish offerings to the gods with spectacular pyramids of flowers, fruit and cakes offered at the temples on festival days and celebrations. All these kinds of art still have close links with the religion of the people and are something that people do on a daily basis. Another special characteristic of art in Bali is that it is not generally seen as an individual pursuit. In the West, art is often carried out by the artist on his own, reflecting his own individual world view in the hope of achieving personal wealth and fame. For Balinese artists, art is something that's done as a group, and many artists may participate in one piece of work. And Balinese art is not restricted to temples and offerings. It decorates objects such as jackets, motorcycles, hotel menus, and so on. But perhaps the most significant characteristic of Balinese art, and one that distinguishes it most from the art of the West, is to do with its expected lifespan. Carvings are made in soft stone, which is gradually destroyed over the years. The humid climate rots paper and cloth paintings. The magnificent offerings of fruit and sweets are eaten. Wooden statues are destroyed by insects. But Balinese artists accept that their work is ephemeral, not permanent, and instead of slavishly preserving the originals, they produce new art. And all this rebuilding, renovating and replacing means that the island's art continually evolves and perpetuates itself.
That is the end of part 2.
You now have half a minute to check your answers.
Now turns to part 2.
Part 2.
A tutorial between two students and their tutor. The students are doing a research project on computer use.
First, you have some time to look at questions 21 to 25. Now listen carefully and answer questions 21 to 25.
Dr. Barrett?
Sammy, come in. Is Irene with you?
Yes.
Good. Sit down. Right. We're looking at how far you've got with your research project since we last met. You decided to do a survey about computer facilities at the university, didn't you?
That's right. We decided to investigate the university's open access to a computer when they need one, so we thought it would be a useful area to research.
Good. It's not a topic anyone has looked at before, as far as I know, so it's a good choice. So what background reading did you do?
Well, we looked in the catalogs in the library, but we couldn't find much that was useful. It's such a specialized subject. Hardly anything seems to have been published about it.
And as well as that, the technology is all changing so quickly.
But the Open Access Center has an online questionnaire on computer use that it asks all the students to do at the end of their first year, and the supervisor gave us access to that data. So we used it as a starting point for our research. It wasn't exactly what we needed, but it gave us an idea of what we wanted to find out in our survey. Then we designed our own questionnaire.
And how did you use it?
We approached students individually and went through our questionnaire with them on a one-to-one basis.
So you actually asked them the questions?
That's right. We made notes of the answers as we went along, and actually we found we got a bit of extra information that way as well, about the underlying attitudes of the people we were interviewing by observing the body language and things like that.
How big was your sample?
Well, altogether we interviewed a random sample of 65 students, 55% male and 45% female.
And what about the locations and times of the survey?
We went to the 5 open access computer centers at the university, and we got about equal amounts of data at each one. It took us 3 weeks. We did it during the week, in the day and in the evenings.
Not the weekends?
No.
So, presumably, your respondents were mostly full-time students.
Yes. Oh, You mean we should have collected some data at the weekends from the part-time students? We didn't think of that.
Okay. It's just an example of how difficult it is to get a truly random sample. So, how far have you got with the analysis of results?
Well, everyone agrees there was a problem, but we're more interested in what they think should be done about it. The most popular suggestion was for some sort of booking system. About 77% of the students thought that would be best. But there were other suggestions. For example, about 65% of people thought it would help if the opening hours were longer, like 24 hours a day.
Before you hear the rest of the talk, you have some time to look at questions 26 to 30. Now listen and answer questions 26 to 30.
The Atlantic Ocean, named for the legendary lost island of Atlantis, has made up for the romantic origin of its name by becoming the most important commercial highway in the world, yet traces of romance continually mingle with the business of the sea. For instance, the Spanish adventurers who first sought gold and silver in America frequently found their ships becalmed, usually on the edge of the steady trade winds, about 30 degrees north or south latitude. A sailing ship could carry only so much water, and as it lay motionless under a hot sun for days or weeks, the tortures of thirst were agonizing. The horses were generally the first victims. They had to be thrown overboard when they died or became crazed with thirst. Because the Spanish caballeros thought highly of their horses, even crediting them with souls, they suffered great remorse and believed the ghosts of the proud war horses were haunting the scene. They saw the restless spirits in their dreams and related their dreams to sailors. Whenever the mariners passed that way, they would see in the spray or clouds images of wild horses bearing down on them. They began to call the broad belts of calm the horse latitudes, the romantic name by which they are known today.
That is the end of part 3.
You now have half a minute to check your answers.
Now turns to part 4.
Part 4. You will hear part of a lecture about product life cycles.
First, you have some time to look at questions 31 to 40. Now listen carefully and answer questions 31 to 40.
I'm going to begin my lecture today with a look at product life cycles. Now, as we go through the product life cycle, I will be trying to raise some issues which are important with regard to each phase of the cycle. I won't have all the answers for you this morning. This one of the lecture series is just to get you started and, I hope, interested. Let's start with the first phase of the cycle, that of product design. This is really the most important part of the cycle. We often talk as if it is consumers who are responsible for recycling, and so they are, but in reality, the major responsibility must be borne by designers. They can design products where recycling is easy and cheap, or difficult and expensive. In the latter case, the likelihood is that recycling, though technically feasible, will not in fact take place. Now, don't jump ahead, because the second stage is not product manufacturing, but rather that of materials acquisition. This is the activity we do when we mine coal or other minerals such as gold or iron or copper. In addition to mining, there is harvesting, which includes the cutting down of trees as a first step in the making of furniture or paper, or fishing. These activities have costs which are not only money costs. Pollution is one of the extra costs. We have also to think whether the resources we use are renewable, such as trees, or not, such as coal and other minerals. The third stage is not manufacturing either. It is materials processing. This is where we take the raw materials and use energy to change them into a form that can be used in manufacturing. For example, trees must be turned into paper or oil into plastic. The cotton plants that grow in the fields must be turned into cloth. All of these activities require the use of chemical processes, and, as with all chemical processes, waste is produced, often of a dangerous kind. And now we come to the manufacturing stage. This is usually the most expensive in terms of cost and energy and waste. The wastes are often those that contribute to global climate change. For example, we make 41 billion glass containers, mostly bottles, each year, and we throw most of them away. A lot of manufacturing seems unnecessary if we could only organise things better. And this could mean greater profits for the manufacturing companies too. Stage 5 is packaging. Many products are packed in paper or plastic, which themselves, of course, have their own processes and costs. Excessive packaging is often criticised, but it must be remembered that packaging serves a purpose, often more than one purpose, such as maintaining freshness and hygiene, as well as providing information. In our globalised world, we must never forget the next stage, which is distribution. This is the stage where transportation and energy play a big part. Lorries, trucks, trains, planes and ships all use up the precious stocks of oil and, as we know, generate greenhouse gases, which, as we hear again and again, contribute to climate change. Stage 7 is the point of it all, using the product. Looking after products, using them in the recommended ways, timely repair and maintenance all reduce the need for early replacement and reduce the number of products in landfill sites. We should not encourage the purchase of single-use products, that is, products which are designed for use on one occasion only and then to be thrown away and replaced. I'm going to skip a stage for a moment and move straight on to the final stage, which is disposal, putting the product in the bin. This is the end of the life of the product, and we lose it completely. It may have only a little value, but it does have a value even at this stage of its life, even in fact when it's actually in the landfill site. Now, I missed out one stage. This is a cycle within a cycle. That is, within the life cycle of the product, there can be a closed-loop cycle which can extract more value from the product. This is the reuse and recycle loop. It is a closed loop because, in theory, it can continue forever, though in practice, of course, this is not possible. Recycling products mean that they can be used to make more of the same product. CDs, bottles, books, or that they can be used to make different ones. For example, 1 pound of recycled paper can make 6 cereal boxes. And if we recycled all our newspapers, we could save 40,000 trees a day. Now, with this approach to the life cycle of a product in mind, we can go on to consider life cycle analysis.
That is the end of part 4.
You now have half a minute to check your answers.